Let me move on to Lesson 10, Introduction to the Hebrew Verb and the Perfect Tense. Semitic words are formed by adding prefixes and suffixes and inflexes to a lexical root. These changes give different shades of meaning. The verb used in the paradigm in this lesson is pakad, to anoint, to attend to visit, or to muster. Several related nouns have the same sequence of consonants and a similar meaning. So you have pakid, overseer, pekudah, visitation or supervision, and mifkad, an appointed place, and pikud, a precept. Lexicographers therefore identify the letter sequence Pe, Kof, Dalet as the root of all these related terms. Now, if you were to look at the Brown-Driver-Briggs dictionary, or lexicon as they're commonly called, here we have the enhanced Brown-Driver-Briggs Hebrew and English lexicon. It will list the root pakad. It'll list various meanings of pakad, but then it will list various nouns with that same root. And so here you have pekudah, oversight, mustering, visitation, or store. And then here you have pekudim, musterings or expenses, and pakid, a commissioner, deputy, or overseer, and so on and so forth. So in this particular dictionary, it actually lists everything by the root. And that would also be true of various verbal forms. And so we're going to be introducing the Cal Perfect, but then there will be other stems off of that same root, the pual and the pael and the hifil, and so on and so forth. Moving back to the introduction then, the lexical root does not occur as such in a sentence, but classifying a word by its root and by its affixes is a convenient way to study various forms of a word. And in the verbal system, the simplest form of the verb is called the kal. It's from a word kalal, which means to be light. And so we'll start with the simplest form, which actually happens to be the most common one as well. So the paradigm for the Cal Perfect is illustrated with pakad, and he's simply choosing one of the meanings appointed as the meaning he's choosing for the paradigm. So you have pakad, he appointed, pakadah, she appointed, pagadta, you appointed, pagat, you feminine singular appointed. Notice that there's a second person masculine singular form and a separate second person feminine singular form. And then pakadti, I appointed, first common singular. And then you have pakadu, that's they appointed. And then you have pakadtim, you masculine plural appointed. Now again, there are actually four different forms of you. There's you masculine singular, you feminine singular, you masculine plural, and then you feminine plural would be pakadtim. And then finally, we appointed pakadnu. And you need to learn the paradigm of the verb in the Cal. There'll be a quiz on that. I think I use, instead of pakad, I use katav, which means to write. but it has all the same endings as these. Now, the paradigm is a little different than in English. It begins with the third masculine singular form because that's the simplest one, pakad, which means he or it, if it's a masculine singular it, appointed. And then it goes on to the feminine singular, pakada, and then to the second masculine singular and on down the list. And you can read through this material. I don't really have a whole lot to say about it, but note what the vowels are and where the accents lie. In certain cases, as you'll see, the accent is receded, as in the first common singular, pakadti, and the first common plural, pakadnu. In the other cases, and also in the second masculine singular, pakadta, the accent is on the next to the last syllable rather than on the final syllable. But you'll need to learn those paradigms, and it would be good to be familiar with these endings, the nu being a first common plural, the t being a first common singular, the ta being a second masculine singular, the t being a third second feminine singular, all added to the basic form. And then if you have an at the end, that's a third feminine singular, and an u at the end, that's a third common plural type ending. Now, when you have a guttural, it will affect the paradigm. So here he gives you the word amad, which means to stand. And for the most part, the paradigm of this verb in the calperfect is going to be the same pattern that we saw with pakad. But when you get to the second masculine plural, there's a change. In the paradigm form, if you go back to pakad, in the second masculine plural and second feminine plural, the vowel that starts off being a kamatz ends up reducing to shava, probably because it becomes propretonic. Well, you can't put a simple shava under a guttural, and so the first consonant of this root is a ayin, so we call this a first guttural verb. The first consonant of the root is the guttural, and so since it can't take a simple shava, it takes a hataf patah instead. Ayin likes a vowel, so, and it started off being an a vowel, so we get a half patah, half shava in the second masculine plural, and also in the second feminine plural, second person feminine plural. Either you all, and Southern works good for this, y'all stood, or y'all ladies stood. It would be one way of translating that into Southern English. Verbs with a second consonant that's a guttural also have a problem, because in the second feminine singular and in the third common plural, you're trying to put a shava under the second consonants. Again, if you go back to the paradigm here, in the third person feminine singular, you have a shava under the middle consonant, she appointed, but then you also get a shava under the third common plural, under the second consonant of the root. Well, when you try to do that to a guttural, the guttural complains. It says, I can't live with just a shava. And so you make a little compromise, half shava, half patah, hataf patah, and that's how you resolve that particular issue. Verbs with a guttural in the third position also have a problem, but only in the second feminine singular form. In the paradigm of the second feminine singular, what you would normally expect to have, you'd have pagadta, kind of the D and the T slurred together, pagadta. But then when this last consonant is a guttural, well then it complains that, well, I don't like that shabah you're trying to give me. You're basically kind of having two vocal shabahs in a row, then slurring them together. And so what you do instead is that it takes the A vowel. So it's kind of rule of shabah applying, but it's influenced by the guttural, because gutturals, except for aleph, prefer A vowels. You end up with an A here. So you get shama'at. So shamata is she heard, you heard, you masculine singular heard, but shama'at is you feminine singular heard. So how do we translate these verbs that are in the perfect? The basic idea of the verb in the perfect, if it's an active verb at least, is completed action. And so in most cases, it will be translated with a simple past. So here you have nafal, which would be a third masculine singular pattern. And nafal means to fall. So nafal means he fell. That would be a typical meaning of it. But it also can mean the same thing as what we would call the perfect in English. And so here you have yarad. Yarad means to go down, and this third masculine singular. That could be he or it went down. Or he or it has gone down. That would be more a perfect rendering of it. So it could mean he went down or he has gone down. Kind of past action with the present result thing is in the perfect in Greek, if you're familiar with that. Now, if the action of the verb logically precedes that of another verb in the sentence, it should be translated with a perfect. I went down because he had fallen. So here you have halaktati, I went down, ki, because nafal, he had fallen. However, there is no strict tense with these verbs. In certain contexts, it can be translated present tense, especially certain verbs. Stative verbs are almost always going to be translated present tense. But in certain contexts, even active verbs can be translated present tense. So a verb like remember, verbs that signify thinking or knowing or perceiving, will be typically translated as a present tense. Zakarta, zakar means to remember. So zakarta is you, masculine singular. Could be translated past, remembered. But it could also be present. You remember. And at times, context may suggest that the action is in progress, in which case it's a general truth, or that it's a general truth, and present tense will work well with that. So if the context of shatav, yashav, nu ba shalom is something that's always true, then we would say not that we dwelt in peace or that we have dwelt in peace, but that we dwell in peace, something that's always true. Well, anyway, the perfect basically means completed action. In the prophets, it can even mean future. It's completed in the mind of the prophet, called a prophetic perfect, or a perfect of future reference. I'm sure we'll refer to that sometime later in the grammar. And so it's a rather odd language where the same form can be translated past, present, or future, depending on exactly what the context is. But the more basic idea is completed action, and for practical purposes, you should generally translate it as some sort of a past tense in most of your exercises. We'll continue on in the next video.